The history books tell us that Dilmun was the Garden of Eden, a verdant paradise where the wolf did not slay the lamb and sickness was a stranger to the sun-drenched streets. They are wrong. Dilmun was never a garden. It was a ruthless, high-stakes clearinghouse for the ancient world's most precious commodities. It was the Walmart of the Bronze Age, a logistical juggernaut that sat at the throat of the Persian Gulf, dictating the flow of copper from Magan to the hungry kilns of Mesopotamia. But today, the legendary Land of the Living is a scorching necropolis of 170,000 burial mounds, a sprawling field of tumuli that stretches toward a horizon of shimmering heat haze. We are looking at the greatest concentration of ancient graves on Earth. For decades, archaeologists treated Dilmun as a mythological footnote, a fever dream of Sumerian poets. But the data tells a grittier story. When we sift through the stratigraphy of the Qal'at al-Bahrain, we don't find the remnants of a peaceful utopia. We find the debris of a hyper-specialized economy. We find weight sets, highly standardized spherical stones of hematite that prove Dilmun's merchants were the first to master a globalized trade language. They didn't just sell goods, they sold trust. They were the middlemen of the sea, the silent partners in every palace and temple from the Indus Valley to the Euphrates. The curiosity gap lies here. How does a civilization that literally controlled the heartbeat of international trade, a society that survived 4 millennia through pure economic cunning, simply vanish into the brine? The traditional narrative blames the shift in trade routes or the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. But empires don't just leave a strategic hub because of a change in management. People leave when the ground beneath them turns to poison. I've spent months looking at the isotopic signatures of the bones recovered from these mounds. There is a strange, repeating chemical signature in the teeth of the late-period Dilmunites. It's not the signature of a people conquered by the sword. It is the signature of a people struggling against an invisible, crystalline enemy. The Mesopotamian texts praise Dilmun for its sweet waters that supposedly flowed from the ground like a miracle. But if you look closely at the edges of the ancient canals, you see it. A white, crusty veil creeping over the landscape. The mythmakers called it paradise. The data calls it a ticking ecological time bomb. Dilmun didn't die because its markets failed. It died because its greatest asset, its unique hydrological system, became its executioner. We see the transition in the sediment, the shift from the lush, date palm-heavy pollen counts of the early 2nd millennium BCE to the sterile, salt-tolerant halophytes of the collapse. Now, let us peel back the layers of dust and resurrect the truth of this fallen world. The collapse of Dilmun presents a profound intellectual friction. In the archives of the Royal Geographical Society, we find maps that label this region as the Land of Two Seas. The name refers to the artesian wonder of the Bahraini archipelago. Massive subterranean aquifers of sweet, pressurized freshwater that burst through the seabed into the salt-heavy Persian Gulf. For 2,000 years, Dilmun's power was built on this geological anomaly. They had mastered the blue ocean of their time, using these springs to create vast agricultural oases in a desert that should have been uninhabitable. But when we examine the late-period dossier, the anomaly emerges. Around 1700 BCE, the stratigraphic records show a sudden, violent shift in the hydrologic cycle. This wasn't a slow drought. It was a chemical inversion. I call it the bitter spring anomaly. In the core samples from the northern coastal plains, the layers of dark, fertile silt are sliced through by a thick, aggressive band of crystalline salt. It's as if the earth itself began to sweat brine. The human truth being dismantled here is the idea that Dilmun was a victim of maritime competition. Our data-driven investigation suggests something far more insidious. The salt feedback loop. Dilmun's intensive agriculture relied on overdrawing. As the population grew to support the pearl trade and the copper markets, they tapped deeper into the Dilmun aquifer. When the freshwater pressure dropped below a critical threshold, the surrounding seawater didn't just sit there. It surged inward. Through a process of lateral seawater intrusion, the very veins that carried life to the date palms began to carry the ocean. The sweet waters turned brackish. We see this reflected in the dental records of the skeletal remains, a sharp spike in enamel hypoplasia, a marker of systemic stress and malnutrition, coinciding exactly with the rise in soil salinity levels. First-person researcher. When we plot the carbon-to-nitrogen ratios in the organic remains, we see a society trying to pivot. They stop growing wheat. They switch to salt-tolerant barley. They try to intensify the pearl harvest to buy their way out of the ecological debt. But you can't eat pearls. The economy was hyper-optimized for trade, but it lacked environmental redundancy. Once the water turned, the entire logistical machine seized up. This is the middle box mystery. Dilmun did not fall to an invading army. It was strangled by its own success. The more they traded, the more they pumped. The more they pumped, the faster the salt reclaimed the land. By the time the Neo-Babylonians arrived to claim the territory, they didn't find a lush trade hub. They found a salt-crusted wasteland where the great stone temples were being eaten from the inside out by salt crystallization. The pattern interrupt occurs when we realize that the Dilmunites knew this was happening. We find evidence of sacrificial wells, deep shafts filled with votive offerings, copper bulls, and precious stones, thrown into the rising salt water as if to appease a subterranean god that had turned bitter. They weren't just fighting a physical change. They were witnessing the death of their theology. The land of the living was becoming a land of ghosts.
Everything.
One grain of salt at a time. The final layer of the Dilmun dossier reveals a chilling resolution. Using open context and TDAR archaeological data, we've mapped the final displacement of the population. They didn't vanish. They dispersed, returning to a nomadic existence that their ancestors had abandoned for the promise of the two seas. The curiosity loop. The curiosity loop closes when we realize that Dilmun's collapse was a choice of priority. They prioritized the short-term extraction of the blue ocean pearl markets over the long-term stewardship of their subterranean lifeblood. The tragedy of Dilmun is a mirror held up to our own hyper-globalized world. It warns us that wealth is a fragile veneer when it rests upon an exploited environment. A civilization can survive the shift of empires and the cooling of markets, but it cannot survive the poisoning of its primary resource. The salt remains today, a white scar on the earth, testifying to a paradise that traded its future for a handful of pearls. Our investigative journey ends here, at the edge of the bitter spring, where the silence is broken only by the crunch of salt beneath a researcher's boot. Now, we must look forward, for the same geochemical ghosts haunt the modern aquifers of our own era. The land of the living serves as a ghost
He's waiting
story for
for
the 21st century. A reminder that when the water turns, the story ends.